Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Nitty Gritty episode 4 now. So last time we talked about kind of below the elbows, a little bit about general hand positioning, hand engagement, etc., and a little bit about grips. This time I want to do the same thing, but now we're returning back to the leg. So I want to talk about foot position. And part of the reason I want to talk about this is that right now my open longsword classes are going over the idea of agility, and part of that is building upon basic level footwork. And along with that is the idea of, what do these different foot positions actually get you? What should your feet be doing, etc. So first off, let's return back to where we were, the idea of being sunken down, ready to play forward with passing steps. So what I really want to talk about here is, when it comes to the lead foot, not a whole lot changes, right? We always want whatever foot is in front to be facing toward our opponent. Obviously, if it starts kicking in, your leg will start closing off, you'll start turning this way, now you're fighting sideways, not a good thing, right? We also don't necessarily want it flared out, but that's not a very common problem, so toes towards foul, nice and simple, right? The back leg, on the other hand, has a lot of different things that it could be doing. So, let's kind of go over those. Now, for the most part, if I am looking to pass or project energy kind of in the middle game, right, where I'm not necessarily looking for a ton of offline yet or things along those lines, then my toe is usually hovering at about a 45 off of that center line. So if we look from the front again, this would be my feet in line. This is about the kind of engagement I normally have, just kind of over here. What that means is that I get a little bit of inwardness as I go. I also get to push off of the ball of my foot as I go, etc. And as I change feet, so as I pass forward or what have you, this guy just flares out. Nothing too crazy. Now, that's not necessarily always the case when it comes to passing footwork. So, let's talk about flare, right? Everyone loves flare. So, if I'm in a position, for example, like let's say flug or another cross hands position where I'm looking to apply energy in, then I tend actually to flare my knee out and thus turn my leg into more of a right angle. Now the reason for this is the difference between engagement of the foot off of those two directions. So there's the 45 or there's the right angle. So if I have my foot at a 45, what's happening is I get my hips a lot more square. I'm using a bit more of the ball of my foot, and it's pretty much like I'm about to run. So I'm very much playing down this middle line. Even if I move offline, I'm still very much centered that way. If I flare my foot, what that inclines a lot more of, even if I am standing relatively square, my hip has to start coming back, and thus when I push off of it, more of it is going to stay. Now that's not to say that I can't pass like this. I absolutely can, and I did for many years, but when your foot is at a right angle compared to your lead foot, you start using more of the side of it. Thus, it is more often more beneficial to start looking at the idea of linearity. Now, here's the caveat to that. Let's go back to that flug situation. So I'm looking to apply energy down and across from my right to the center, and then presumably across the left, what have you. So, why do I flare my leg here? Reason being is that if I know I'm about to put a whole bunch of energy there, if I keep my hips square, I can still absolutely do that. But if I flare, much like before when we talked about the idea of loading back, I get a little bit more. So now I get that turn of pushing in, now I'm locked forward, now I'm going across, now I can power in. So it's the same exact thing as we talked about up here with forward, forward across, back, boom, boom. Same sort of thing. And really, the more you can think about these as one piece, the more you start to see some linking similarities. So let's look at another sort of foot motion, kind of the other one I wanted to cover for passing style stuff. Let's look at a volta stable. So volta stable, in case you don't know, is the idea of turning your feet forward or back to apply energy and also to apply your weight to one side or the other. Now, what we're looking for in this case is the idea of a more dramatically loaded position. So, I'm here, I'm facing forward, I'm ready to play, ready to do whatever I'm going to do. If I load back, not only will that just be my upper body, though I can do that, I'm also going to open my hip and load myself over. Now, the lead toe can actually stay where it is, and that's where we start to get things like linear lunging stances, but in this case, I'll let it turn because I'm looking to cock back this whole side. So now my knee needs to flare, the chest needs to flare, and that means that I get all that energy applying inward as I come back through. And a lot of that has to do with stuff we already talked about, but also the foot. Okay, so making pretty good sense here, if I'm gonna play down the middle, or I'm focusing on being more, agile, etc., then I'm going to keep a bit more 45, and that's with both feet. If I'm looking to settle myself a bit more to apply energy across, then it's better for me to go ahead and load that sometimes. And then also is true in regards to, let's say for example, I pass. If I'm landing here, most times when I go to wind or do things along those lines, since I need to be linear in this context, I'll go ahead and settle down with a flared leg, as that now allows me to apply my energy more in that plane. So, let's now talk about linearity and the feet there. So if we're doing something like, back sword right here, etc., then the feet don't necessarily do a whole lot that we haven't already talked about, because they are purpose-built for what we're looking for. The only time that this rule kind of starts to break is if we start talking about traversal. So I want to go over that in a little bit of detail, not too much, just a little bit. So traversal, what is traversal? Traversal is the idea of moving laterally, and strictly speaking, you could apply the term traverse to any time you move laterally with one step, right? But in this case, specifically backsword, though it also does appear in rapier, though it's not usually mentioned, I am going either forward or backward. So the forward traverse, going to my inside, is when I move my back leg out first, and I bring my right leg over, so I've stepped essentially one line over. And this is why most diagrams of it are a circle with lines meeting to the middle, a target, basically. So the idea here is I just kind of step over, and I've gotten a little bit of angle. If you did the same, we could end up circling each other. There's a whole bunch of reasons you could do this. Alternatively, other way, I'd move my right foot, and then my left foot. So, do my feet change here? Not necessarily, but in regards to how they receive my weight, that's where I want to get a little bit of nitty-gritty with it. So, I move to my right. When I pick up my foot, I don't just want to set it down. So if I do that, what'll happen is this foot will take too big of a step, I'll cross myself up, and then I'll teeter. Instead, what I want to focus on is any time, and this is also true when you're doing passing step stuff, but anytime I'm moving laterally, I want to step out and kind of sink into it. This is now making tension back to that CG that I've got hovering between my feet, which allows me to then transport the rest of my leg and weight over without falling. And that's kind of the way I like to think about this, is my legs aren't just making an arch to support me, they also are constantly pushing kind of back against that CG to keep it between them. And this is especially important in that lateral movement, because if I don't do that, if I put my weight onto my lead leg, now I'm definitely going to swing too far and I'm slower. So as soon as that tendril goes out, it is pushing back against my movement and thus becoming a cushion. Same is true on the other side. Now, if we're talking about passing step stuff, it pretty much is exactly the same in regards to what my foot is doing. We're talking about linear stuff though, where I am flared out. Now, on this side in particular, people have a serious tendency to curl in. What I mean by that is, since the hip is open, the hip may want to come up almost parallel to the foot. So, good traverse, or at least preferred traverse in this case. Little bit of gain, little bit of angle, but I've not gotten all that much closer to my opponent. Not so great traverse, and the issue that I'm trying to draw light here, I got a lot closer and a lot more in. This is because it's on the open side. So, how do you counteract this? Part of it is keeping an eye on exactly where you're stepping. So I pick my target, in this case the camera, my audience, hello. And as I step, what I want to focus on is I'm not bringing this hip forward, I'm bringing myself over. Now I do gain a little bit of ground, but that's ground by angle, not ground by me getting closer. I also think about that same tension bridge, but now since we're talking about linearity, I'm thinking about loading that foot. So as I step out with my leg, and it starts to receive my weight, starts to push back against me. As I step over, I sink down onto that leg and load it, so if need be, I can push off of it for my lunge. And really, that's one of the more important things to be able to do off of traversal, is either pass or lunge, depending upon what you're doing. The traverse shouldn't be punk, punk, now I gotta settle down to lunge. It should always be over, no problem. And that's kind of how you want to think about that. Or if we're talking about passing step footwork, over, pass. But either way, that's kind of the main things I wanted to talk about. Now, One more thing I want to draw to attention, and this in particular comes from right here, is the idea of a crescere, or crescimento. So that is wherein my lead foot, and it can be either lead foot, this also applies into passing stuff, this kind of bridges the gap and everything. It is just a movement of the lead foot. So it's that going away from me in some way. Now, you can think of this kind of in the same vein as a lunge, but not quite, as rather than me pushing my weight forward to achieve something, I'm really more just widening my stance with a step. And there's a variety of reasons you can do this. Mostly what it is it's part one of a movement. So, for example, one of the places I use it the most is the idea of either a bogan or a colpi de volano. So I'm going to move underneath an incoming attack. So I bring myself a little bit offline, but rather than bringing offline with this foot, I go in and against it, giving me a little bit of distance, turning my foot as I land on the ball of my foot, and then I can spring off of it, gaining distance, gaining angle, etc. Another example of this would be if I need to apply a little bit more energy inward while not being in front of a target, I can use some offline movement with that crescere to get myself a little bit more on top, a little bit more core, or alternatively sometimes to dodge. Now in a crescere in regards to just linear, it's literally just that. So I just wanted to kind of mention that, and again, all that is not a lunge, it's just me moving my foot away from center line wherever I need to go, and the decrescere is actually the exact opposite. But that one's a little less done, we'll worry about that another time. Point being though, what do your feet do? What should I be thinking about with my feet? You don't necessarily need to actively use them crazy hyperfixation, but you should be cognizant of what angle you're looking to play in relation to how they affect your hips. Because you can stand nice and square, as much as you think, but if your foot is flared, that is going to start affecting your movement if you're looking to do this kind of plane. If you're looking to get that twist, then step, no problem. But if you're not, you're going to find things being affected. Why am I not getting any strength in my line? Maybe it's because you're not opening your hip and thus giving you more stuff, Maybe, why are my traversals why can't I lunge off my traverse? Maybe it's because you're stepping too much on one side, maybe you're not loading. So think about the feet as they are the foundation of all of your legs, and from there, depending upon what footwork you're looking to do, you should be able to find the correct answer. But either way, that's a little bit about the feet. Next time, I'm not exactly sure what I'll go over. This is kind of the 4 main building blocks, so we'll just kind of see whatever takes my fancy and I'll go from there. But either way, hopefully that's helpful. Thank you all very, very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.